Bills Mafia, what's going on? Tonight on Cover One on Buffalo Late Night, we got a treat. Two fantastic guests, Caroline Fenton from Locked On LSU and Bruce Nolan, everybody's favorite weatherman, here to talk about the Bills. Let's get it. Bills Mafia, what is going on? Welcome to Buffalo Late Night. Glad you're here. It is a Thursday. Very exciting week. We are in the NFL Combine. It is frenetic in the NFL world right now, but I'm glad you've chosen to be here on Buffalo Late Night with us on Cover One. Again, thank you for tuning in. I'm Thomas DeLoss on the Cover One Network. You've chosen to hang out with us, but guess what? If you're not and you're listening tomorrow on Spotify, happy Friday to you. You can find our show free on all social media and streaming platforms, including Spotify and YouTube, or however you pod. If you are watching on Twitter right now, hop on over to our YouTube page. Come join the conversation. Also, want to make sure you are subscribed to our YouTube page. Go ahead and hit that button and make sure you hit that notification button. It'll let you know every time one of our shows is live, and we got a couple of them tonight. Myself, Greg Thompson's following me, and then I believe we also have a premiere of another show. So make sure you're tuned in, make sure you're tapped in. Also, guys, again, this is Combine Week. Make sure you are subscribed to the Cover One Pass, providing you all the best content, all the best analysis. You got stuff from the film room, from disguised coverage. We saw Anthony Prohaska on WGR today talking about all sorts of prospects. Make sure you guys are tapped in. And of course, you get that Slack chat, which provides you some in-depth information, insider scoops, like the fact that David Edwards might be signing from our own Greg Thompson. So make sure you guys are doing that. Make sure you guys are checked in. Tonight, like I said in the header, we have a ton going on. First off, we've got Caroline Fenton of Locked On LSU to talk about all things LSU, like Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., and maybe a few other categories. Then later in the show, we have got everybody's favorite man of mystery, Mr. Bruce Nolan. So guys, make sure you are all tapped in with all of that. Before I get too much further, like I said, guys, I want you to make sure you are all in on the Cover One Pass. So before I go any further, I want to hear from two of the best, Craig Thompson, Aaron Quinn. Guys, go ahead.
Many people ask us the best way to support us here at Cover One, and that is to sign up to become a Cover One Pass member. That contribution helps give us the access to all the data and information we use to create the content that you love.
And I think most importantly, brings you into our community of insiders. It's a great community based on Slack. I know a lot of people don't want to be on social media anymore or be in on those conversations. We bring all of it to you right in our great community of educated fans. And most importantly, you get access to our content creators.
Even better than that, everybody loves merch. You get awesome t-shirts, a cool decal, and a letter from the Cover One team signed directly to you.
All for $60. That gets you the entire season, next year's free agency and draft. $60. Click the link in the description. Cover One Insider. Become one today.
There you are, guys. That was Greg. That was Aaron, part of the Cover One Buffalo podcast. Guys, let's get right in tonight. We have a very, very special guest, Caroline Fenton from Locked On LSU, to really tell us more. Caroline, what is going on?
Hey, I appreciate you for having me. You know, you've reached out, asked, could you talk about Brian Thomas, Blake Neighbors, Mason Smith, Jayden Daniels? I will take any opportunity that I can get to talk about those players and this LSU team from this past season. It was truly a blast, at least on the offensive side of the ball.
Absolutely. And, you know, as a content creator, primarily targeting a lot of Buffalo Bills and really the future of this team, the Bills have questions on both sides of the ball. You know, guys like Mason Smith, guys like, you know, Brian Thomas Jr., they are fan favorites because I'm sure you know a lot of people like to kind of gravitate to what could be. And Brian
Yeah.
Thomas Jr. is the type of guy that Bills feel like maybe they could possibly see at that 28th pick. So before we get too deep into this, why don't I ask you right off the top, what is your overall impression of Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr.?
So Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., I think, were the reminder that LSU fans needed, that that 2019 national championship season with Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, that wasn't just a once in a lifetime Cinderella story. That, oh yeah, by the way, just a few years later, you can have the most elite duo, elite wide receiver duo in all of college football again. That's exactly what Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas were. I felt like they were the perfect 1-2 punch, because what you wouldn't get in one receiver, you would get in the other. Brian Thomas was just that explosive, speedy, deep ball threat. That I mean, he has elite speed. I think receivers at the combine go Friday, so I expect him to be a sub 4.4 guy, like the 4.2s, 4.3s. He's so incredibly explosive and quick, and he can get downfield. He's truly a vertical threat. Malik Neighbors, on the other hand, his innate ability to create separation is unlike something that you see at the college level a lot. He's the guy that can kind of change direction so quickly without losing any speed or losing any sort of acceleration. And he's going to be, his yak abilities, I like to say, I don't think that's a real word, but it is now, that he can just get those extra yards after the catch. It's kind of like how I think maybe we view an AJ Brown or a Deebo Samuel at the NFL level. Like, they can get those extra yards. They'll fight for those extra yards. Doesn't have the same size as those guys, as an AJ Brown and a Deebo Samuel, but he's just an explosive play waiting to happen, because he can turn a 3, 4, 5 yard screen into a 10-yard gain.
Right. Now, with those two guys, obviously they've been dynamic. Their stats this year, I mean, Brian Thomas Jr., 17 touchdowns, led all of college football in that category. He was, I mean, the dynamic playmaker. And between the two of them, had 31 touchdowns. I guess what I want to start off with is, Malik Neighbors had the upward trajectory that you'd really like to see as a wide receiver. Brian Thomas Jr., on the other hand, there's a bit of concern in terms of his stats, right? If you look at his stats from his senior, or his year this year as a senior to previously, he went from 1,100 yards and then previously hit 361 yards, a big jump.
Yeah.
What do you think was the cause of the fact that he didn't have that same type of statistical breakout last year when he was with Malik Neighbors?
I think it was just due to bodies in the room, truly. I mean, LSU is known to just print receivers. So in 2022, that was really the year of Kayshon Boutte. Going into that 2022 season, Brian Kelly's first season at LSU, Kayshon Boutte was projected to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. Like, Kayshon Boutte even had like Heisman conversation hype going into that season, because he had shown that ability to be elite. He was set back by injury a couple seasons prior, so we were all kind of prepped and ready for a total breakout season for Kayshon Boutte, even more than he had the year before. But of course, whether it was issues on the field, issues off the field, whatever it was, he just didn't come to fruition to be that. Malik Neighbors was really that breakout candidate in 2022, but with the offense and the relationship with the coaching staff, the relationship with Jayden Daniels, they continue to try to make Kayshon Boutte work, where I think Kayshon Boutte was fed the ball a lot. With Jayden Daniels, limitations in that 2022 season, which is funny to talk about the limitations of Jayden Daniels 2 years ago, because obviously we did that this past season. But there were inherent limitations with Jayden Daniels, that he struggled to push the ball downfield. They utilized the tight end a lot more. Mason Taylor was the tight end, the freshman tight end in 2022. He was LSU's third leading receiver. So I think LSU more so utilized the short passing game. And then in 2023, that's really when the passing game evolved. That's when you saw Jayden Daniels completely unlock this second level, his accuracy with the deep ball, his willingness to throw the ball deep. He didn't have that same kind of willingness in 2022. And as we've seen this past season, that's Brian Thomas's bread and butter, is the deep ball. So I think it's a combination of two things. It was a stacked receiver room. It was, frankly, a crowded receiver room. And also, it was a completely different offense, because it was a completely different quarterback in Jayden Daniels.
Now, based on that, obviously with Brian Thomas really kind of becoming a name this year, how much of what teams plan for Neighbors with what kind of coverage, how did that benefit Brian Thomas Jr.?
It's a really good question. And I think that we learned over time, game after game, as the season progressed, that if you were going to double and triple Malik Neighbors, then Brian Thomas was going to make you pay. That maybe early on, since we knew the name Malik Neighbors, since opposing defenses were game planning for Malik Neighbors, they knew what to expect for him, then maybe that would kind of open the door for more explosive game for Brian Thomas. I feel like there's this perception that Brian Thomas was secondary to Malik Neighbors. And while you could totally make the argument for that, Brian Thomas led the nation in receiving touchdowns. Like the fact that you view the nation's leading touchdown receiver as a secondary option, I think that kind of tells a little bit more of the story, that there was still a whole lot of attention on Brian Thomas. You see a lot of man in the SEC, and I think you saw a whole lot of man to man with both Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors, and just this offense was constructed that one of them was going to get the ball in their hands. So he very much so got plenty of attention from opposing defenses, but that is still a question that I have about Brian Thomas at the next level. When you don't have that when you don't have that Malik Neighbors next to you to take some attention away from the defense, then what does that look like for Brian Thomas? I like to compare these two maybe to the Cincinnati Bengals and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, where my questions about T. Higgins are, well, what do you look like when you don't have an elite certified number one next to you? You could kind of apply that same kind of logic to Brian Thomas, but T. Higgins is still a damn good receiver. Same thing with Brian Thomas. Still a damn good receiver and incredibly speedy, something that Malik Neighbors probably didn't have as much.
Now, with those two being obviously coveted receivers, we know that Neighbors is likely top 10, top 7. Mm-hmm. There's some people that truly believe he could go before Marvin Harrison Jr., that his rise to, or, the ascension of really is not a surprise, but more that people are just overlooking the fact that he is just as good. So if the Bills were to, and I don't suspect because the cost is almost prohibitive, what would they be getting out of Malik Neighbors? And then on the flip side, if they stayed at 28, what are they getting with Brian Thomas Jr.? So how would you compare and contrast the two, and what are the Bills getting with either one of those weapons?
I think the weaknesses for both of them are that they don't have the deepest route tree. For Brian Thomas, I would say that his bread and butter is vertically, is stretching the field,
right.
Whereas Malik Neighbors is maybe a more horizontal threat. And he can still get downfield. He can still be your deep threat. And Brian Thomas can still get you yards after the catch. But that was really kind of how they were divided up. Whereas their route tree didn't need to be developed as much as maybe a one go-to guy in college football, because whatever one couldn't do, the other one could. So that I think kind of applies to both. I think with Malik Neighbors, what you're getting is this really rare combination of twitchiness and explosiveness and being able to change directions on a dime. Like, he is so fundamentally sound when changing direction. I mentioned a comp earlier, AJ Brown, more so in the yak, but less in the size. I think his ability to change direction reminds me a lot of Antonio Brown, where he could just completely turn on a dime, and it's like, my goodness, how did he not even lose a step? But he's going in a different direction. That is what you're getting in Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors is also incredibly physical. He's 6 feet, 200 pounds, not the tallest guy, not the biggest guy out there, but he's incredibly physical, and he kind of has that dog, like that tenacity that I know GMs and coaches are looking for in wide receivers at the NFL level. And I think with Brian Thomas, what you're getting is probably a little bit more of a project, because like you said, Brian Thomas had that one breakout season. I do have questions about how ready he is as a plug and play day one starter in the NFL, simply because he doesn't have the deepest route tree, and he doesn't have that long, body of work that we may have seen from Malik Neighbors from the past 2 seasons. But what you're getting with Brian Thomas is certain things that you just cannot coach, and that speed and his ball tracking ability. Like he can beat you in press coverage. Like he has the ability to be physical, but I think his greatest trait and greatest attribute is his ability to create space, because just he's 6'4". His legs, his one step is probably going to be significantly longer than a 6'1", 6'2" corner that might be on him. So you're getting a speediness and just a touchdown getter in Brian Thomas, probably a more complete product in Malik Neighbors.
Now, with that being said, obviously you mentioned Jayden Daniels. Mm-hmm. If for whatever reason, it seems to be the consensus, the Patriots might just take a quarterback at number 3 overall. Mm-hmm. And then there's also some people, and I believe Caleb Williams is probably going to go number 1, but for whatever reason, if he goes and Jayden Daniels goes first or third or whatever it is, what are they getting? What is Jayden Daniels? Because it seems just very similar, kind of like what happened with Brian Thomas. It seems the ascension of Jayden Daniels has really taken some serious heat recently, and he's now becoming more of a name, and he's right up there with Drake May, right up there with Caleb Williams. So if he lands in the AFC East, what are the Bills fans going to be running themselves into?
You're going to be running into a quarterback that is incredibly elusive and quick with his feet. Like Jayden Daniels, someone asked me before, what is a comp for Jayden Daniels? I said, I don't know. Like, I could not tell you. And that doesn't mean that he's one of one or in a class of one. It just means that I've never seen a quarterback at this level. Jayden Daniels' size, he's kind of slight, right, but be able to find these teeny tiny holes and create plays and be able to run down the field 20 or 30 yards, but also have such an accurate and strong arm. Like Jayden Daniels can lob that thing down the field 30 or 40 yards. And that is what made Brian Thomas so valuable in this offense. Jayden Daniels has elite accuracy and has an elite deep ball. He also can escape pressure. Like it's not even just jetting off and running down the field 20, 30 yards if his first or second look isn't there. It's being able to escape that pressure, being able to extend plays. I think the one thing with Jayden Daniels that concerns me as a pro prospect, just like I said, he's small. Like that worries me as an LSU fan watching him not slide and go one-on-one with a 280-pound linebacker. It made me gasp every single time, but he's tough as nails. He's been an incredible leader. One thing that really stood out to me about Jayden Daniels was, I believe it was the LSU Arkansas game. He hits Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas drops the ball. He went right back to Brian Thomas on the next play just to keep him involved, keep him in the game. Like, look, I still got you. I still trust you. So he's been a great teammate, a great leader. The other thing that kind of concerns me about him as a pro prospect is this LSU offense was predicated on Jayden Daniels' legs and Jayden Daniels' deep balls. What maybe struggled a little bit more was the intermediate passing game. Was that a Jayden Daniels thing? Was that a receiver thing that he didn't necessarily trust his receivers in the intermediate? That I don't know what to tell you, but it was more so big, boom, explosive plays within this offense.
Okay. And then I got one more for you. The Bills on the other side of the ball have 2 guys under contract going into the season. It's going to be a big overhaul, basically retooling this defensive line. And there's some really high-end prospects at the top. We know Byron Murphy. We've seen guys like Jared Verse. You've seen them today in the combine doing some really nice things. Obviously, Tavondre Sweat is a mountain of a man. Yeah. But then there's a guy that is kind of getting lost in translation, but is a very large human with what Bruce Feldman on his freak list put him, one of his freaks, at 6'6", 320 pounds, Mason Smith. A guy that underwent an ACL reconstructive surgery and kind of just fell to the wayside. A guy that, from what I've read, probably would have been a first-round pick had he not gotten hurt. What is Mason Smith? If he lands in Buffalo, 3rd, 4th, 5th round, what is he? And is this the type of thing that you need to unlock this guy because of he has the profile, he has that just physical, just specimen type? Is it unlocking him? What is it? Tell me about Mason Smith.
Mason Smith, is a freak, like a physical specimen that could be studied by scientists. Because, like you said, he's 6'6", 320 pounds. He is massive. One of those people that sometimes whenever I see football players in real life, away from other players, I'm reminded of like, whoa, you're a really big human. Mason Smith will stand next to other football players, other defensive linemen, and I still say, wow, you're a really big human. But he also has that combination of speed that you don't find very frequently, size and speed, and specifically being so quick with your feet. I think LSU fans will look at Mason Smith and say the best that never was. Oh my goodness, what could have been with this player? Because obviously, with the size alone, it's incredible upside. So you saw in his first season at LSU, we saw a whole lot of potential. And in going into the 2022 season, it was a look out, everyone, because this guy is poised and ready for a breakthrough. Game 1 against Florida State, he tears his ACL on a sack celebration. Like the most just punch in the gut kind of things. So of course he's out for the entirety of the 2022 season. All of the talk going into the 2023 season was, okay, now this is the year for Mason Smith. Like you said,
Right.
just never really came to fruition. And he had some massive plays, and you saw kind of glimpses of what he could have been. The reason why I don't think he fully came to his full potential, I think he was still maybe recovering from the ACL, whereas he would have been greenlit from a doctor, but still, was he 100% strong? Was he 100% back to what he was before the ACL? He could have been coming along from that. I think that, we look at ACL recovery as like a year, whereas those who tear their ACL say, no, it's actually kind of more like 2.
Yeah, the mental side is a lot.
Totally. The mental side, just the getting physically stronger side of things. I think the second thing is, I don't know how closely you or your listeners follow college football or LSU football. The defense was absolutely horrendous, like absolutely terrible. And I put that on coaching because there were a lot of instances this past season where the defensive coordinator, Matt House, who is now no longer with LSU for good reason, was putting the right players in the wrong position. Harold Perkins, one of the best linebackers in college football, put him on the inside, essentially rendering him useless and couldn't get to the quarterback, which is what he did best. We saw another defensive tackle at LSU, Mekhi Wingo, kind of take a step back from the year prior. So I put that on coaching as well. I look at Mason Smith as the most exciting and fun project that a defensive coordinator could take on because he has the talent. He has top 3, top 5 kind of talent, but of course, with the injury and the setback and the underwhelming year this past year, I'm sure he'll fall to no further than the third. But if he goes in the third, I wouldn't be surprised.
So I'm going to ask you one more question, just to clean this up. Because of the fact the Bills are at 28, there's real no chance they're going to get to Neighbors unless some, Brandon Bean lifts high, heaven and earth. With Brian Thomas, one, does he deserve to be the 4th receiver off the board? And if he so happens to be available at 28, do you think the Buffalo Bills should make the move to go and get him? With your words, he said he's a bit of a project, which is fair. Do you think he is deserving of being picked at 28 to run aside from a Stephon Diggs for the Buffalo Bills?
I think he's absolutely a late first-round talent. And when I say project, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just mean that you need a little bit more development. But I think that he absolutely has the potential to be a really, really, really solid number 2. Can he be a number 1? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but having that kind of 1-2 punch and having your 2 be a Brian Thomas, I think that's an elite combination. If we can all agree that the top 3 receivers, Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, in whatever order you want to put them in, I think there's a very strong argument for Brian Thomas to be at 4. I think probably the other 2 candidates would be an A.D. Mitchell from Texas and a Keon Coleman from Florida State, because both of them are just absolute dudes. And Keon Coleman is a massive human being. I'm talking about bullying up on NFL corners. But I think there's absolutely a very strong argument for Brian Thomas to be at 4. I wouldn't put him any further back than 5.
Beautiful. Well, Caroline, I very much appreciate your time tonight. I know Bills fans are loving the information you provided us. And of course, if we end up taking an LSU player, I'll have to have you back. You can give some more insight as to these players and really what to expect when they, hit the Bills roster. But thank you very much. And why don't you let people know where they can find more of your content?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me every single day on Locked On LSU. You can find that on your preferred podcast platform, or you can check us out on YouTube as well. I'm on daily Nashville local radio 11 to 2 on 102.5 The Game. You can find me on SiriusXM College Sports Radio.
Caroline, thank you so very much. Have a wonderful rest of your night, and we'll be talking soon.
Appreciate it. You'll have a good one.
Take care. Guys, that was Caroline Fenton of Locked On LSU providing amazing in-depth just analysis, breakdown, anecdotal experience, everything that you could possibly want from a guest of the show, but just from a person that has such a wealth of knowledge, for Bills fans that have been clamoring about Brian Thomas Jr., about Malik Neighbors and everybody in between. So amazing stuff right there. Before I get too deep, and we are going to be heading into our next guest for the night, I want to tell you guys about our sponsor. And that is, if I can even get, my brother's not here. My brother's the the producer, and he's not here tonight. So I apologize if things are a little jacked up. But guys, Cover One is excited to once again partner with the most dynamic name in fantasy football, Underdog Fantasy. I want to tell you about the easiest way to get some action in the NFL. It's Underdog Fantasy and their pick'em game. Just pick a higher or lower on your favorite or least favorite player's stats, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Underdog keeps it super simple with their easy-to-use website and mobile apps. Pick between 2 and 5 players to fill out your pick'em entry, get every pick right, and take home some cold, hard cash. Use code COVER1 and get your first deposit doubled up to $500 by Underdog. Underdog also is the best and easiest place to play fantasy sports. Not only do they have the NFL, but they also have MLB, NBA, and more. Get on the fun today. Join Underdog Fantasy using code COVER1. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be talking to a very special guest tonight, a guy that is somebody I'm very fond of, one of my favorite people from my very early on days at being Buffalo Late Night, has been a huge fan, huge friend, not fan, friend, well, maybe he is, huge friend of the show, but a guy that has supported me and has, anytime I called, which is far too often, been able to jump on. So, guys, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Bruce Nolan.
Well, I mean, I don't know how I'm supposed to live up to those words that you gave me, but I promise I will do my best.
Well, Bruce, I am ecstatic to have you on tonight. How are you doing? How have you been? How's life?
It's the off season, man. And it's funny. I have loved the off season since I was little. Like, I had the draft guides that I would open up and I would take my notes. And my first real draft, I've mentioned this story before, but my first real draft where I committed to learning prospects and taking notes was the Rick Mirer draft. Ooh. That was the draft where I made my first swing and a miss, where I was 100% convinced that Rick Mirer would be just as good as Drew Bledsoe. And I said, it doesn't really matter. Whichever one you take is going to be fine. And I had a Rick Mirer football card when he went to the Seahawks, and it just didn't work out for me. And I said, I just don't understand how on earth I could have been wrong, because, I was young and younger anyway, and much stupider. So ever since then, I have been fascinated with the offseason because there is a methodology to team building. There is a philosophy, there's a structure to it. And for a lot of people, it was the joyful time of being a Bills fan because the Bills were bad. For me, it's always been a joyful time for me. When the Bills were good, it was a joyful time for me. When the Bills were bad, It was a joyful time for me. I love the offseason. I would spend hours upon hours upon hours in the offseason when I was much younger playing, video games. And we would get to the actual football and I'd be like, I mean, okay, I guess, I'll play the real games, but really I want to get back to the draft is what I want to do. So it's been a good time for me. I enjoy this time. I love football in general. So any chance I have to interact with football, I'm going to do it. And the offseason is a great opportunity to do that and have kind of college football and pro football and other teams and your teams that all intersects in a beautiful Venn diagram that we call the NFL offseason.
Man, what a monologue. Now, Bruce, obviously, we are truly in the thick of things right now. Just got done with Senior Bowl East-West Shrine game. We are now in the combine, 2 weeks away from free agency. After that, you're talking the draft. I mean, there is everything and anything you could possibly want. In regards to where we're at right now, as a fan, but also a content creator, or, even as a person who, if you put yourself in the shoes of a GM, at this point in the season, how do you feel for the Buffalo Bills, where they're at? What is the first stage of what the team needs to do? Like, what do you feel is the best approach to addressing these very major needs, where it's wide receiver, defensive line? What do they need to do right now heading into this combine that you think is going to make this team the most successful?
I think the most important part of the offseason happens before any player acquisitions get made, and it's self-scouting. I think that one of the main problems that you have with organizations that remain bad, when you use the phrase bad organizations stay bad or bad teams stay bad, I think most of the failure happens in the first month after the last game has been played. And most of the failure comes from, we don't know what our problems are. And so because of that, everything else that they do for the remainder of the offseason is done in service of a solution that wasn't necessary or was wrong. Think about this for a second. Think about you and your wife are having difficulties in your marriage, and you go to a therapist, right? And the two of you are trying to talk to your therapist about what it is exactly that your problems are. And she says to him, well, sweetheart, the issue is that you never help out around the house. And then he says to her, well, I really think the issue isn't that I don't help around the house. I think the issue is that you spend too much money. Those are very significant gaps in what the issue is. And part of the therapist's job is to be able to get them to kind of come together and understand that there are probably layers to this. There's probably not one solution, but we need to have a conversation about getting on the same page. And so for a lot of organizations, you see bad maneuvers made because the diagnostics were bad. And so for me, I think that's the most important part, because it's the most important part of individual growth. It's the most important part of organizational growth. I don't know why that wouldn't also extend to teams. The worst thing you can do is misdiagnose the problem, because from there, everything else will be wrong. You go, you know what it is? Thomas, I think the problem is we don't have enough tight ends. That's the issue. So you know what we should do? We should trade up for Brock Bowers. Just imagine that. Imagine if that happens as a Buffalo Bills fan. You go, what is happening right now? You're looking around going, what on earth made them think that was necessary? What happened was they misdiagnosed what the problems were on the team. So for me, I'm very focused in at the most honest time in the offseason. The most honest time in the offseason is right at the beginning of the offseason, because everywhere else, they're just lying out their teeth. Now, they're lying mostly through their teeth in the offseason, but there's more honesty. So when I hear phrases like, we need to be more explosive on offense, shout out to Aaron Quinn, because of course, he and I have been having this conversation for what seems like a million years about toxic differential and how important that is. And it's nice to hear that explosive plays need to happen on offense. You go, okay, explosive. So if there's a receiver who runs a 4.67 with a below average 10-yard split, and he's a big bodied possession, move the sticks kind of guy, you go, okay, probably not the target for the Buffalo Bills. So for me, it's about diagnostics. And I think that based on what I've heard, there seems to be alignment between what we think the team needs and what the team thinks the team needs.
Right. So, and I think that's a big part about what we're very much looking at. It seems to be almost I don't want to say an echo chamber. I feel like a lot of these conversations right now, whether they're redundant or just kind of people are just stewing over the same stuff, it seems like right now we're kind of like what you're saying, diagnosing. We're kind of slowly figuring out exactly whether it's kind of like putting the pieces together of a puzzle and looking at that mystery and figure out what's going to work the best or what Brandon Beane perceives the issue is. And obviously with new staff, with our new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, parts and pieces that are very, very new, figuring out exactly what this is going to look like and what's going to fix is obviously from the outside, it seems a lot easier than what they're thinking on the inside. And I think a lot of that comes down to, and Bruce, you can speak on this, walking in with having massive, massive dead cap or, above the cap numbers right now, having to find a way to navigate between free agency and the draft. And so I guess my kind of what I want to talk about tonight is how you blend the two and how you kind of circumnavigate a roster building by using free agency and utilizing the draft, and how you weigh each one. Because obviously we know when it comes to free agency, more often than not, people that are spenders are losers. Purely. Generally speaking, the ones that spend a lot of money are the ones that end up at the bottom of the standings at the end of the season. It's just a pure, weird, honest kind of situation that happens. So, Bruce, when you're looking at what's going on right now for the Buffalo Bills, how do you, in your honest opinion, make a decision as to how to weigh how much to invest in free agency prior to the draft to kind of fill those ancillary needs or maybe bigger needs to make that the draft is less cumbersome to have to fill? Because, I was talking with Kevin Bisseri last night, and one thing that I kind of spoke to was, I don't want to go into the draft where you're pigeonholing yourself. We saw that with the Kyer Elam situation where they were chasing, or the linebacker situation where we ended up with Dorian Williamson. That's no problem, but we missed out on a bunch of guys because we were chasing. So how in your mind do you balance those two very, very large asset pool kind of mechanics to making sure that you're making the best decisions?
I think right off the top, you deal in numbers in free agency and you deal in talent in the draft. I think that's a really important thing. What you don't want to do is you certainly don't want to go into the draft being really short on numbers. That's a really significant ticket to overdrafting and allowing subconscious bias to creep its way in and going, yeah, this guy's a better player, but we really need a blank. And I don't want to say I really need a blank. Now, I really want to say, hey, we could use a talent infusion at blank, and I'm good with that. But we really need a blank from a numbers standpoint is not a conversation that you want to have. So I think right off the bat, there's a numbers game to play. Secondly, I think that there's a balance between market rate and the draft. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So if I can get a good safety for $5 million a year, if I can do that, then I would rather do that in free agency and make a call at a different position in the draft, because I live in a limited resource environment. Despite the people who say the cap is not real, it is real. Now, it's a lot more flexible than some people think it is, but it's still a real thing. There are limited resources. And so because of that, you have to make prioritization decisions. This is a Bruceism going way back, but things matter because they're finite. That's what makes them matter, right? If you have unlimited money, does it matter what you spend it on? If you have unlimited time, does it matter what you spend it on? No, of course, no, this doesn't matter. Things are given meaning by the fact that they are finite. So the reason why these things matter is because they are finite. So if I can get a good safety for $5 million, but if I want a good receiver, I have to pay $12 million, then I'd rather get the safety in free agency and draft the receiver versus getting the receiver in free agency and drafting the safety. And those things tie into each other. So you have to look at the market that you currently exist in. And free agent safeties have been undervalued for a very, very long time. So I've done a mock where the Buffalo Bills took a safety at 28. But if there are reasonable safeties, and there are always reasonable instinctual veteran safeties on the market that you can grab for a couple $1 million a year. I would like to go into the draft not needing to get one at all. That's what I want. Yeah, sure. Draft one, you have a lot of picks. Draft one, day 3, I'm good with it, right? Draft 2, day 3, you could never have enough DBs. Dick Geron was right about at least one thing in his life. So for me, there's a market analysis that needs to be done too. So it's number one, take care of the numbers so you don't have to reach for numbers. Number 2, evaluate the market so you can draft the right positions and sign the right positions in free agency.
Now, heading into this draft, first off, are you on the wide receiver train, Bruce?
Absolutely.
So, you mentioned something with the numbers. Obviously, with that 5th-year option, having a wide receiver in the first round, there's like 4 main elite categories: quarterback, defensive end, defensive tackle, wide receiver. Those are your big ticket items. That 5th-year option really benefits you. And you're seeing, look at what happened with T. Higgins. 1 pick out of the first round, and they're now having to decide, and probably will only have him, whether it's this year or they're going to trade him. A lot of stuff that they're running into. When you're going into that first round and you're deciding whether it's a wide receiver or a defensive tackle, how do you decide based, obviously there is a swath of wide receivers that are pretty deep in terms of beyond the first round. And it seems like there's a decent amount of defensive players. How do you determine positional value with need and cost? And how do you swim in those waters where you feel like you're making the best decision long-term for your team, but also giving Josh what he needs and kind of going in between? Because you obviously want to provide your quarterback with the most amount of weapons, but you don't want to put yourself in a position where the drop-off on defensive tackle or defensive end is nuclear, where you could get a wide receiver in the second round that may not be far off from a Brian Thomas Jr. to a Ricky Pearsall.
I think that, first off, I think that's a good point. The drop-off between Brian Thomas and a Ricky Pearsall may not be as big as the drop-off between, the people who are after Dwayne Carter, for example, the defensive lineman from Duke, who I'm a huge fan of, by the way. I'm a Carter fan. There's no question. I missed the Nick bandwagon. I missed the Aaron bandwagon. I arrived just in time for the Dwayne Carter bandwagon. So for me,
that's got to be a t-shirt, by the way.
Yeah, I feel like that should be a t-shirt. Too old for Nick, too old for Aaron, just in time for Dwayne. So I think the first thing, and I know this is really, really obvious, but I think the first thing is simply which player has a higher grade for you. And I know that's really obvious, but I think we get tied up a lot in some of the nuances. Would you rather have the 5th best blah, 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 or the 2nd best blah, blah, blah? Well, the answer is whichever one has a higher grade, right? And then if they're close, then all these other factors start wailing in now. They start coming on in. They're screaming in off the couch, right? And that is, what about the draft depth? Can I get a player like this in the next round? Would I have to expend assets because of tiering? And a lot of the same mindset that goes into fantasy football drafts starts to all of a sudden trickle in, like the drop off for the next tier, right? Okay, well, I'm at the 11-12 turn right now. And if I don't take this, who's going to be here the next time the turn comes around, right? We've all done that in our fantasy football drafts. That same concept comes around again, except this time you have the ability to trade up. So you could trade up and then you have to expend other assets. And you go, okay, what's going out in totality versus what's coming in totality? That becomes a value proposition. So for me, I think that it starts with just who's the better player, but then the rest of the stuff starts to come into play. And I think that when it comes to positional value, I think a distinction has to be made on defensive tackles. I said this with Jordan Davis from Georgia a couple of years ago, and I got absolutely lambasted for it when I said I don't think Jordan Davis is worth a first round pick at all. And people are like, what are you talking about? He might not even be there with the Bills pick, and he wasn't there. The Eagles picked him. And overall, so far, I'm not going to take a victory lap quite yet, but so far I've been right about Jordan Davis. And that is, if you have a part-time player, I don't want to take him in the first round. So when I'm looking at defensive tackles, if I have a player who's going to play 24% of the snaps and be a 2-down player, I have no interest in taking them in the first round at all, ever.
Yeah, goodbye to Vondre Sweat.
I'm just not interested, because you have to be able to affect the passing game frequently. So this is the reason why I don't want to take a running back in the first round for a lot of these reasons, right? I don't want to take a 2-down thumper linebacker in the first round. Like, you have to be able to affect the passing game. So pass and stop the pass is the methodology for victory in the NFL. It has been for a long time. It's not about running and stopping the run. It's about passing and stopping the pass. So if you cannot help me affect those two things, pass the ball better or stop the pass better, then as a general rule, I don't want to take you in the first round because I don't want to use my most valuable assets on those positions. So I think when it comes to positional value, we need to draw a distinction between run stuffing, clogging up the middle defensive tackle, and a defensive tackle who can generate pressure from the inside. And so I think that's the needle that has to be threaded before you can even have the which is more important, defensive tackle or wide receiver conversation. It is, what kind of defensive tackle am I even dealing with here? And to your point, I think there's a drop off. So if you wanted to convince me that the move is to take a defensive tackle at 28, if there's one that's appropriate there, and then trade up into the early second to get a wide receiver for exactly that reason, I'm on board. I get it. I understand the logic.
Now let's say this and put yourself in Brandon Beane's shoes and be Bruce Bean. That sounds fun.
By the way, that's t-shirt. Be the Bean.
Be the Bean. I like that too.
Bean.
That's a good one. Be the Bean. Dwayne Carter.
Dwayne Carter, 28. I get fired immediately. No, I'm just kidding.
It sounds like a Michael Scott skit. Okay. Moving forward, we'll be stuck here forever. Put yourself in Brandon Beane's shoes in your honest, just straight up opinion, how you feel Brandon Beane based on, how he's looked. I know we were talking in the Cover One chat earlier with RAS scores being, it doesn't have to be an end all be all, but it has value in terms of what Brandon Beane looks at. Top 30 visits are obviously, we don't know about those yet, so it's kind of hard to really get a good feel, but those being huge, if they've played in the Senior Bowl, that's a big part. And then obviously with free agency, and we don't know a lot of this stuff, so it's hard to really give a true estimate. But if you're Brandon Beane going into the first round, what are you doing? What is your best guess or your best feeling as to what the Bills would do in that position to best suit need, to fill, based on value, and to help the team in an immediate fashion? Because we know, in the mind of Brandon Beane, in the mind of Sean McDermott, though they understand they've got, contract extensions and they've got more time, the runway for a coach and a GM, specifically Sean McDermott, can be cut very quickly. What do you think is the move? Because with first round picks having immediate impact more often than not, they're day one starters. Who are they taking that fills a need, has the value, gives the most immediate impact, and maybe provides job security or peace of mind in that regard?
Based on everything that they said, unless there's a run on receivers earlier than they think there's going to be, because I think that your range for Brandon Beane's first round pick should be wherever the Bills are, plus wherever he can get to using a fourth. That's the range that you should look at, because he's done it twice now, where he's flipped a 4 to move up a couple spots. So your answer for where are the Bills going to pick is either at their spot or however high they can get with a 4. That's the answer. So if the run on receivers happens earlier and all of a sudden you see Brian Thomas, Troy Franklin come earlier than you think, right? Then I think that there's a possibility that it ends up being a defensive tackle or a defensive end. But if there is someone who I think is of reasonable value within striking distance of the Buffalo Bills at 28, this is not me hope casting. I actually do think they take a receiver. And I think that because of everything they've talked about so far this offseason, it has been, we have to take pressure off Stephon Diggs. He's still a number one. We need to be more explosive. I mean, all the right things are lining up for a Troy Franklin or a Brian Thomas at or close to 28. So for me, that if I was, I'm not going to put bets on it because the draft is crazy, but if you forced me to, and I was like, I need to predict this based on their behaviors and based on their words, that's what I would think.
Now, in regards to that, there's obviously a large swath of receivers that you could pick your poison. There's all different flavors, size, whatever, however you want to put that into words. It sounds very strange. if you're looking at all the options right now and you're in the first round, and Brandon Beane the other day in his press conference mentioned about speed and how if it's just strictly speed, that could be something that dissuades them, because when the speed goes away, what else is there? They might not have anything else. So if you're looking at who's available, who are you taking, Bruce? What receiver, from what you've watched in tape, from watching college football all year, and knowing what you know, and from Brandon Beane's eyes, what receiver, obviously within reason, not neighbors, Adunze and Harrison, I know you'd feel the same way. If they go up and get one of them, even if it is expensive, I think we're all going to be very, very excited about the prospect of having that type of game-changing receiver. But in the world of reality, which receiver come 28, if everybody else is available, what is your flavor? What's the receiver that you feel like best suits Josh Allen, whether it's the short to intermediate, the boundary, the deep ball, with speed, maybe not a ton of speed, but great route running and release package? Who fits the bill for you that, one, is a great number 2 receiver to Stephon Diggs, but maybe even eventually could be the heir apparent?
I don't know if it's 28, and I don't know if I'm making some sort of statement here that people are going to absolutely scream at me for. But okay, Adonai Mitchell needs to be talked about as one of the only receivers that's a day 2, maybe sneak his way into the bottom of day 1 sort of guy that people think has a skill set that the Bills don't currently have. Because one of the things that Brandon Beane did say that made my ears perk up a little bit is he talked about the contested catch stuff. And we saw a very significant play happen at the end of the Buffalo Bills season where Stephon Diggs failed to bring in a contested catch. And so Brandon Beane has said before, and this is something I disagree with Brandon Beane on fervently, but it doesn't matter because he said it, and that's what he thinks. And that is, your last loss tells you what you need to work on. I don't think that's a good methodology at all. I think a 1-game sample size for determining what your needs are is absolutely a brutal way of doing business, but it's an incredibly unscientific method to go about doing it. But in the last pivotal moment of that last loss, there was a failure to bring in a contested catch. So to me, I think to myself, okay, I mean, Lance Zierlein said Adonai Mitchell was George Pickens. And that's an interesting comp. If I can get George Pickens without the attitude issues, I'm interested, right?
Yeah.
And there has been some, is he CD Lamb conversations, which I thought was way strong, but hey, I'm not gonna complain about it, but it gives the Buffalo Bills a skill set they don't have. And so for me, I think one of the things I mainly look at for taller receivers is, are they able to separate? Because taller receivers have a higher hip elevation and they struggle significantly to be able to get their hips low enough to be able to break and accelerate out of breaks, which means every time they run a route that requires a break in a route stem, they actually lose ground. They don't gain it. And so it's one of the things that you see pop up with taller receivers all the time is that they struggle to separate. One of the things that makes Mike Evans such an unbelievable player is that he's so tall and yet he's still getting open. I mean, he's getting open on horizontal breaking routes. And you're like, wow, that's just impressive. That's the thing that separates people from Mike Evans from people like Kelvin Benjamin. And so when I look at Mitchell and I think to myself, this guy has traits. I'll be very interested to see what his combine looks like. And at the time we're recording this, it hasn't happened yet. But I think that he tracks the deep ball well. I think he can play vertically. I think he has great ball skills outside his frame. All the things we're just talking about are things that we liked about Gabe Davis, plus the things we didn't like about Gabe Davis not having.
Right.
And so for me, that's a player that I'm not sure I'm willing to say 28 at this point. But if the Buffalo Bills had a run and they all of a sudden, took him at 28, I mean, I wouldn't be like mad about it. I mean, let's be honest. If you take a player at 28 who you think is a high second round pick, that's not bad value. I mean, 28's 5 seconds away from being the high second round. So for me, that is a discussion. I mean, the tape is good. The tape is good against good teams.
Power 5 conference.
Yeah. So for me, that's just somebody I'm keeping an eye on. I know that Thomas, Troy Franklin have gotten a lot of buzz, but based on what Brandon Beane has said, I am keeping an eye on Mitchell.
See, I'm very much in agreement with you. And in fact, I think it was Matt Miller at NFL Draft Scout. A lot of people know him. He said, do not let the Chiefs or the Bills get AD Mitchell. And I think there is kind of what you're saying with Gabe Davis. First off, if the money was right, I think Gabe Davis would be back, which tells you they like a lot of what Gabe Davis does. So if they can find the archetype that is Gabe Davis, but maybe does things better than Gabe Davis, bringing up that catch percentage from a 54 to a 65, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in the NFL, that's a very, very large difference in terms of game by game. I truly believe finding somebody like that, but you're right. A guy that has the ability to not only deploy speed, has size, isn't, I think the one thing about Gabe Davis, which was tough, is he's a strider. He's not just innately fast. He has to get up to speed. And a lot of times that's tough for a guy like Josh Allen because it doesn't lend itself to he's always fast at the same time. So it's hard to get timing routes with a receiver like that because you don't know where he's going to be or don't know when he's going to get there. And it seemed to be, and we noticed this more often than not, they seem like they were on two different pages, Josh Allen and Gabe Davis. So I think finding somebody that Josh can trust, he knows he has sure hands. And it was weird enough, and Bruce, I'm sure you saw this. It seems very strange to me that last year, not this past season, but the year prior, Josh Allen would go to Isaiah McKenzie almost as much or more than he would go to Gabe Davis in some very high percentage or high leverage plays. So something's there, but I do agree that a guy like AD Mitchell, who has the ability with speed, has the ability with size, and he seems to be kind of just a guy that I don't know why he's getting lost in translation, but he doesn't have the namesake like other receivers, and I feel like he really should. Outside of the first, let's say for the sake of conversation, the Bills do not go wide receiver. A lot of people be mad, whatever. They can always justify it, which one thing I did want to say, and I completely forgot. Guys, people are watching. If you're listening, watch the recording later. I implore you to understand this. If the Bills take somebody and it doesn't make sense, Brandon Beane can justify it every time. He will find a way to say that was his 33rd first round grade. If that makes any sense to you, it should. So don't be twisted on it. Don't get upset about if Brandon Beane does something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It happens. He might take somebody that if he, like Bruce was saying, if there's a run on receivers, getting a receiver, even if he's on the cusp of a first or a second round, if maybe you have him on your big board instead of you being at 28 and he's 36, they might take him because then they get that 5th-year option and you don't run into a T. Higgins situation. So don't be upset about it if they take somebody in a position that doesn't make sense in the first round, like a receiver that you didn't expect. But Bruce, let's say they don't take a receiver in the first round. Give me a receiver in the second and third round that you have your eyes on, that you feel like can still give you that same value base, that same impact without that first round notoriety that Bills fans might be looking at.
Well, I mean, I hate to say no things that everybody else says. I really do. I just absolutely despise it when I come in here and I say, oh, this is name and you've already heard of this person before. But okay, I'll tell you what. I am going to give you a theory. I'm just going to kind of outline a player for you, and I want you to try and tell me who it is. Okay? Goes to the Senior Bowl, has a really, really productive week. Thought maybe he was an early day 3 guy, not from a big school by any means. Shares a school with a receiver who is currently on the roster. Has good but not great size, has solid but not amazing speed, but seems to understand route concepts and has made a significant jump to his draft stock in the last month. What do you think?
So if you don't know who he's talking about, Bruce Nolan is speaking on Javon Baker.
I am.
a guy that is Eric Turner, one of Eric Turner's favorite guys. In fact, a guy that Eric Turner has spent a lot of time doing video on. Javon Baker is a fan favorite of a lot of us at Cover One. Obviously, I know the same for you. Tell us about Javon Baker. What about Javon Baker do you feel like if they don't go in the receiver in the first round, what Javon Baker could bring to the Buffalo Bills?
So a couple weeks ago on my show, The Bruce Exclusive, I was talking about the methodology by which I evaluate wide receivers. And I was talking about winning multiple opportunities along the course of a play and how an average play lasts between 4 and 6 seconds in the NFL. But in that time, you can chart out multiple individual inflection points for a receiver to either win or lose the play. At the release, line of scrimmage, after the release in terms of stacking, in terms of body control, in terms of clearing contact, at the route stem, and then again at the catch point. So you have multiple opportunities for a receiver to either check the box or not check the box. And Javon Baker is one of those players who just doesn't check any of them resoundingly enough for everyone to consensusly think he's a first-round pick. It doesn't go, wow, oh my gosh, look at that catch. Wow, look at him blow that guy. Look at this away. Just left that guy in his dust. I said something I probably should have said there on the on a live. We're keeping this PG related. But for me, when it comes to Javon Baker, it's just he just checks so many boxes. One of the big things for me about college receivers is a lot of them come into the NFL and they just cannot get off press. They just can't. And some of them, if you played in the Pac-12 or if you played in the Big 12, some of them don't even face it. And so they immediately you go to, okay, do I have to put him in the slot? And I have no interest in that. I have no interest in additional players that you have to play in the slot. The Buffalo Bills need someone they can play outside as an ex-player. And if it reaches the point where we need to start moving Stephon Diggs into the slot, I would like to not have a team that's solely focused on slot players. So for me, a very significant part of my evaluation for wide receivers for the Buffalo Bills this year is, can he get off press? And the answer for Javon Baker is a resounding yes. And so that's a big part of just making me feel comfortable. He also has the size prototype that you typically like to see from today's wide receivers. It used to be that these traditional X receivers were all 6'3" to 6'5", and that's just not the case anymore. They're all 6 foot to 6'2", and they're 195 to 210 pounds, right? Sometimes you get a rocked up A.J. Brown at 220, right? But overall, you have these people that was, Brad totally caught what I shouldn't have said. And so congratulations to Brad. So for me, when it looks to Javon Baker, he just checks so many boxes, but because he doesn't flash like in the same way on highlight reels, people are just like, You know how I feel about Javon Baker? It wasn't on your show last year, but it was on another Cover One show where I went off on a ginormous tangent before the draft last year about a particular Michigan State wide receiver, if you follow me, Thomas. And I specifically said, why on earth don't we love this guy? Why? Well, I don't understand. He does everything right. Why don't we love this guy? I sat there and I just said, well, he does this, 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 he does this. I don't understand why we don't love this guy. And I went, okay, so let's draft Jayden Reed. Let's just do it. And then he went on and had a very, very, very good rookie season for the Green Bay Packers. I feel similarly about Javon Baker. He just checks so many boxes. And I go, I don't understand. Why did we think that he was a day 3 pick before the Senior Bowl?
Because he went to UCF.
Yeah, is that it? Like, I don't understand. He just does all the things. Don't we just want a receiver who does all the things? It's really that simple for me. He does all the things. He wins at the line of scrimmage. He wins in acceleration outfit. He can stack defenders. He wins at the catch point. He can win it. I'm not saying he's one of those, this is an unbelievable alpha player who just dominates and jumps off the tape. But if I'm sitting there in round 2 or round 3 and Javon Baker's sitting there, I'm going to take him. And I'm going to be darn grateful for the opportunity.
Let me ask you this, Bruce. Maybe this is a little spicy, But let's say there's a massive run. And I was listening to a couple guys today, and there's a belief that maybe 6 to 8 receivers go in the first round. I'd be surprised, but weirder things happen. Let's say 8 receivers go. Would you be inclined to, one, at 28, or maybe trade back to the end of the first or the beginning of the second to take a guy like Javon Baker, knowing the jump from 28 to 60 is massive? And we noticed last year when we waited, that wide receiver, which is why we ended up with James Cook 2 years ago, that wide receiver run can be daunting. In fact, more often than not, you'll probably lose somebody that you have your heart set on. Would you take somebody earlier to prevent yourself from the opportunity of losing them against the fact that it may not, value might not meet the pick?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't do it. I have Baker, as much as I just raved about Baker, I still have him as firmly a day 2 guy, like not a fringe round 1. I see him firmly a day 2 guy, and a reach of that nature just to take a receiver is probably not something I'm interested in. You're going to have players who have better grades. Like I can almost guarantee it. Like I can't see a scenario where you wouldn't have many players, like 15 to 20 at least, who have better grades than Baker when you get to 28. I would not be inclined. Also, I don't want to be the last one to take a receiver in a tier. I mean, it doesn't work. Again, the conversation about fantasy, I don't want to be the last guy of the run. I want to be the first guy of the run, right? So for me, if there are 8 receivers that go in the first round, that means some really, really good players that I didn't think were going to be there are there at 28. You know what? I'll kick off the second receiver run at that point, and I don't need to reach.
Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to try to close out the show. But before I do so, we obviously talked about the draft and kind of what could happen and leading in through the combine. Let's say they don't go the first couple rounds because they do something in free agency. Give me a name of a receiver. Obviously, I don't suspect, though. I mean, you never know. Brandon Beane went and got Von Miller, and nobody thought, for whatever reason, that would happen. I guess you could go the route of maybe a bigger name. Again, I don't think Price, and that's going to fit into the Bills' wallet. Give me a name of a receiver that you think would pacify the Bills to not need to take somebody in the first round, but would still be a very good asset to the Buffalo Bills.
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand your question. Someone who would pacify the fans and the Bills, they could get him in free agency, and they wouldn't need to draft him?
Correct.
I don't think that player exists.
Okay.
Because I don't think any of those players are going to make it to free agency. So one of the things I thought was hilarious is everyone was like, oh, man, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, man, what are they never make it to free agency. Why do we even waste our breath? Like, the reason why the tag exists is to see to it that people like that don't make it to free agency. So for me, I don't ever get excited about when you have the wide receiver room that the Buffalo Bills have, which is you have an aging wide receiver 1. You have a player who I really like in Khalil Shakir, but I'm not going to project him out to be a 100-catch guy. That would be a little rich for me. I like him, and I'm a big fan. I was one of the OG Khalil Shakir people before the draft. And I tweeted out a prayer circle during the draft, and it was like candles, and it just said Khalil Shakir in it. And then they drafted him, and my mentions blew up. They're like, Bruce, you got him. I'm like, I'd like to thank the Academy. And it was a great moment for me. But if that's essentially my wide receiver room, because I'm not going to count on Justin Shorter for anything. So if that's my wide receiver room, there isn't a player that will be available that I could get that would make me so pacified that I'm like, yeah, we're good. We're good. If a good player's on the board there at 28, they're in the second round, nah, I'm good. I'm fine. I'll pass. I got this blah, blah, blah in free agency, so I don't have to worry about it.
See, that's where it lends me based on that. And I kind of had a feeling that's what you were going to say. That's why it lends me to, I think the Bills are going wide receiver first round, because there are a ton of options, both defensive end and defensive tackle in free agency, that would pacify the options. You obviously already have Ed Oliver in-house. you have Ilianku, and I think he probably should get a chance to potentially make the 53. You probably will end up with Daquan Jones. He seems to want to come back unless he gets some crazy number outside of the $7 million or whatever. I think he's probably going to be back in Buffalo, and you might get Shaq Lawson, who knows. But my basis of this is there's enough guys out there that you could pay and keep your defense afloat and not have to worry about spending a crazy amount, because no, they're not going to spend 15, 20 million a year on a defensive end or offensive tackle. So my reason behind that is that makes me believe, unless everything goes absolutely haywire in the draft and everybody goes before the Bills come up at 28, that I think they will. I think that they will target a receiver, and maybe it is an A.D. Mitchell. One name I want to ask you, Bruce, before we go, because he seems to be polarizing, and I don't exactly know where to place him, is Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy, a guy that Anthony Prohaska loves. A bunch of our guys love Xavier Worthy. What is your feeling on Xavier Worthy? Is he worthy? Terrible.
Oh, there you go. You were just waiting for that one.
Is he good enough for that 28th overall pick? Could he be the guy, even though Brandon Beane put smoke out there that speed would not be where he directed himself?
I am openly and meaningfully biased against really, really light receivers. This showed up last year with Tank Dell. It has showed up with every other receiver that has been really, really small, because if they list them at 172 pounds, they're probably 165 pounds. And so for me, I recognize right off the bat that by being out as a general rule on really small receivers, I'm going to miss out on players like Tank Dell, who had a great rookie season. And I'm just going to miss them. And I'm completely okay with that, because I'm also going to be out on all the other players that got overdrafted based on their size. And they thought, oh, we'll just look past the 165-pound receiver. And so if I just make a general rule that if your weight starts with a 1.7 or a 1.6, that I'm going to be really hesitant to draft you, I'm going to be right way more often than I'm going to be wrong. So for me, I look at the same, and I see the same stuff everyone else sees, right? Which is explosive down the field ability. I mean, estimated 4.29, and let's be honest, this is the player that people go, could he do it? Like, could he break the combine speed? Every year there's like one or two players where they go, hey, this guy could, he could do it. He could break the combine speed record. But there's a reason most of the people who are at the top of that all-time combine list weren't good NFL players. And the reason is because a lot of times they're really small. And so football is a game about speed, but it's also a game about bigger people beating up little people. I mean, that's really what happens all day long. I mean, those 4 to 6 second increments are just big people beating up little people. And so I see the same things that other people see, but I'll tell you what, man, I struggle. I really, really struggle with receivers that size. And I know, and I see the same thing. I saw the same stuff with Tank Dell last year. I'm watching the film. I see the same stuff everybody else does, but I just can't get past it. And I'm sure he's trying to bulk up before the combine, so he can try and weigh in at 180, and at least he can kind of cross that threshold and things like that's a big deal for a lot of receivers. But if I find out from talking to his coaches that he played at 165, I'm going to be really concerned. And, there's always a comment. RJ dropped it, right? Hey, he can add another 10 to 15 pounds to his frame. I'm sure he can. He's taller, but if he adds another 15, 20 pounds to his frame, is he still running 4.3? And so I really struggle with people who are that small. And so for me, 28 is just super rich for a player that small.
That's fair. Well, Bruce, I truly do, as always. I've had you on a whole lot of times in the past couple of years, and I always do very much appreciate it. You provide the best analysis, the best insight, even though you don't believe that. And one of the kinder people that I have come across in this this incredible journey of being a podcaster, vidcast, whatever you call this stuff. So I do very much appreciate it. Why don't you tell people, if they don't already know, where they can find your content, because I think it's some of the best on here.
Well, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Bruce Exclusive. And my show, The Bruce Exclusive, drops every Thursday morning on the Buffalo Rumblings podcast network. You will find that it's not in video format, for the same reason why you are currently looking at the super polished dome of my show icon on
It looks good.
the screen. Yeah, thank you. I had it polished before I came on. You shave it down and you make sure you apply some polish. I got to make sure I wear sunscreen though, or the icon will get burned. So that's something that if you felt so inclined and you wanted to consume more of Bruce, that's where you'd be able to do it.
Beautiful. Well, guys, as always, I truly, truly do appreciate you guys spending some time here at Buffalo Late Night and the Cover One Sports Network. If you missed the show, you can go back and watch it. It'll be up in just a few moments after the show completes itself. Or if you want to listen anywhere you choose to pod, you could find our show. I do very much appreciate it, as I said. And we will see you guys here next Thursday. We'll have all the numbers, everything that you want to talk about in terms of wide receivers, 40 times, everything and in between. And, man, we will be a couple days shy of free agency. So, guys, truly do appreciate it. We will see you here next week. As always, I love you. I'll see you soon. Let's go Buffalo.